Welcome, everyone. Boker Tov. Oh, everybody's muted. Okay. I'm Rabbi Corey Weiss, the rabbi at Temple Har Zion in Thornhill. I am co-hosting this morning with Cantor Rachel Littman, who can wave. Go ahead and wave. You'll hear her singing as well. We are very pleased. This is the last session with Alden Solovy. He and I have not met in person, but I will tell you just one. You've heard his bio a few times, I'm sure. I'm just going to tell you that for those of you who know me at the synagogue, I am not a liturgist myself. I'm not great. I never thought I was any good at writing liturgy. I'm good at finding liturgy that other people have written to enhance our services. But I think sometime last year in the height of COVID lockdown, Alden did a program with CCAR members on creating liturgy and just took us through writing some prayers for our congregations in such a clear and moving way that I actually was able to write some prayers and felt a little bit of confidence after that, but used a little of that technique on my confirmation class, who write prayers every year. And so I'm grateful for being able to write a little bit and being able to share a little of what I learned from you, Alden. And so with that, I'm going to turn things right over to you.
Thank you. Well, thanks again for having me, to all the congregations, the clergy, the lay leaders, education committees, everyone who's been involved. I just, again, by way of housekeeping, I know that there are good reasons to have your camera off, and I respect that. We're all adults here, and it's also helpful to me to be able to see as many of you as possible. So if it's not an intrusion or you don't necessarily need the camera off, I would love to have it on. Those of you who've been to the other sessions know will be interactive. I'm going to encourage discussion at intervals, and of course, asking the clergy to keep an eye out for hands or waves or enthusiasm that I otherwise miss. So what's the tochnit, the program for today? It's Kol Nidrei. First, I'm going to talk about everything that's wrong with Kol Nidrei, and then we're going to talk about why we love it so much and what it really does and what its role is. So Kol Nidrei isn't really a prayer. It isn't really even a service. It's a ritual. It's actually a ritualized legal formula in Aramaic for annulling vows. And the formula itself has no mention of God. Traditionally, it is said before sunset, before the holy day begins. I will explain why in a moment. The congregation stands. It's traditionally sung 3 times. In some congregations, some Reformed congregations, the first repetition will be musical only. It gets successively louder, increasing in volume. Some congregations will actually do it musically and then as a solo, and then in choir or in some group to mark that progression. The traditions vary, but the idea is that it successively increases in volume, and the leader is joined, the Shaliach Tzibor, the prayer leader, the representative of the community, is traditionally joined by 2 others, minimally 2 others, holding Sifrei Torah, holding Torah scrolls, thus simulating a 3-person Beit Din, a court of law. So we already noticed something odd for our ritual time together, our prayer space. One, we're creating a court. I don't know of any other time in prayer or as part of prayer that we create or we simulate, if you will, a court. It's not a prayer per se. It's a legal proceeding by all rights. It is this dramatic twilight ritual. It began somewhere in the Gaonic period between, let's say 500 and 1000, probably on the earlier side. And there's a mythology that it was actually begun by Marranos, by forced converts in Spain, as a way to, if you will, annul the forced conversion. That is been debunked by essentially the history of the prayer. The prayer is much older than that. It may have been thought of in that way in those times, but that was not its evolution. In really the first organized prayer book, I've mentioned it several times, Seder Rav Amram, in the 9th century, he calls this a minhag shtut, a stupid custom. It's a stupid custom. Why was it a stupid custom? First of all, rabbis do not want us making vows to God. It is very risky to vow to God. Just look in Torah, in Tanakh, and you'll see all kinds of moments where vows to God go very, very badly. So if we don't want people making vows to God, why are we creating a ceremony, a ritual to annul the vows that we don't want them to make in the first place? Second, it is a kitchen sink of legal terms that even the most studied Talmudic scholar, unless they have deep steeping in law and Talmud and language, the distinctions between these vows that are being annulled, very hard to really explain the difference between all these words that you're going to hear Cantor Lippmann sing at least half of it in just a moment. Almost impossible to understand. The Amei Haaretz, the people of the land, if you will, or us folk, we wouldn't even understand what's being said. And in fact, rabbis have been trying to kill it off over the centuries. And the progressive Judaism in Germany took it out of the prayer book. It seems morally unjustified, logically unjustified, theologically unjustified, and yet the people wanted it. And so in progressive Judaism, in the history of the prayer, and from, let's say, the reformers in Germany to 1978, when Gates of Repentance came out and it came fully back, was the music was just played. And then the music was played, but some alternative text was sung, like a poem. Then the music was played and some alternative Hebrew text was sung. And then the music was played and a psalm might have been sung. And then an interpretive Kol Nidrei. And by inches, it came back. Why? First, people loved the melody. But not only people, cantors. Cantors, this melody can really showcase how a cantor can take hold of the congregation and bring the congregation to a place of deep spiritual readiness, if you will. And great cantors move us in a phenomenal way. Even there aren't really any, but even the not so great cantors can move us with this particular prayer. So the cantors pushed for it, congregants pushed for it, In the 12th century, Rabbeinu Tam flipped the focus. So the focus was past vows being annulled, and in the 12th century, it became future vows being annulled. This in part addressed, not only did rabbis have problems with it, but our Christian hosts in many countries had problems with it, because could Jews be trusted if their vows are being annulled? If I made a promise last year on a promissory note, or to take care of something, and that vow is annulled, how could the Jews be trusted? So it caused problems, or at least suspicion in some, if not many, Christian communities. Of course, it wasn't about those kinds of vows. It was about vows to God. But again, it's hard to know what this odd thing is all about. So it's caused trouble for us in the non-Jewish world. The rabbis haven't particularly liked it, and yet we as the congregants have brought it back. And if any of you in any of your congregations have attempted to fully get rid of a beloved melody, even for Shabbat, you know just how hard that is. So that's the sort of the rubric, the problems with this particular rubric of prayer. It's a beautiful, pardon me, not prayer, this rubric of liturgy. It's a beautiful passage when we take it apart, when we really look at what's going on. So to summarize, it's a puzzling origin, it's of controversial content, and it has tremendous mystique. So let's hear two parts of Kol Nidrei. Kol Nidrei opens with a line, Or Zaru Alatzid Sadiq Ul Yishrei Lev Sipka. Light is sown for the righteous and for the upright in heart. So that's the prelude. We'll talk about that. Then we have this formula of invoking the courts. Essentially, we're creating our court in that invocation, and then the legal formula itself is chanted. So I'm going to put it on screen so we can follow along with Cantor Littman. So bear with me a moment. Oh. So here we are. There's Or Zarua, and then we begin with this odd creation of a court. Cantor?
Yeshiva shel mala u'vishiva shel mata al dat hamakom v'al dat hakahal anu matirino v'itpalela im habayanim. Kol nidrei v'yesarei v'charamei v'konamei v'chinoyei v'kinusei u'shavuot din darna Tabana, Karimna, Vedasana, Nafshatana. Miyom Kippurim za, an Yom Kippurim haba, aleinu, letovot
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Just gorgeous. So I want to take a second and just ask whomever is willing to share, what does that feel like? You know, to just suddenly, here we are, Monday afternoon, well, Monday morning there, and you're suddenly there in Kol Nidrei. Any pull, any thought, any comment about just hearing this music?
It feels powerful, like a call to judgment.
Feels powerful, like a call to judgment, and it is intended to feel powerful. Beautiful. Thank you. And even you're not there yet. You're not there. You don't have the pomp and circumstance going on. You don't have the Sifrei Torah. We're not all wearing talitot. You know, that visual cue that it's Kol Nidrei evening, and yet it has that power. Other thoughts or comments? Thank you, Gwen.
It's very majestic.
It is majestic music, absolutely. And the majesty of the music is obviously it's on purpose. It brings us to that place Gwen was talking about. Beautiful. Thank you, Dara.
It was very emotional. Emotional,
Shirley. Yeah, there's deep emotion.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It was a one-time thing. It was a total connection. The music connecting. It was amazing. Amazing. It was just amazing. So connected and emotional and so together. And I felt so much together with all of we folks together that are listening. It gave me also a togetherness to connect with the people who are looking in and together. We're not in synagogue, but we're still emotionally with this music connected.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, we're connected.
Thank you. The connection. Michael.
And there's always this sort of plaintive or supplicant kind of quality to the music. I don't know if it's a combination of the music and the words, but you get that feeling of really being put into that mode.
Great. Beautiful. Thank you, Michael. Other comments? I want to give everyone an opportunity. So in an article by Rabbi John Desmond Rayner and Rabbi Andrew Goldstein, they actually talk about the emotional elements. They say that Kol Nidrei has a plaintive element, meaning it evokes the suffering of our people in ages past. It has a penitential element, which expresses our deepest yearnings, surely deepest yearnings, connected. It also has a jubilant, triumphant element to it that comes a little later in Kol Nidrei. And the fourth element is nostalgia. It evokes the nostalgia of Yom Kippurim past, family members, moments of both joy and loss. So there it is completely layered emotionally. Any other thoughts about having heard this gorgeous music? Yeah.
I was just going to say that I agree with that comment very much, that I find that it sets me back historically to growing up and hearing that with family that are still with me and that have passed, but it also sets the stage for Yom Kippur Day and what I'm going to be dealing with internally and as a community and with my congregation in preparation for being at temple for the entire day following.
Beautiful, beautiful. So this is the warm-up act. You know, it's getting us there. Beautiful. Thank you for that. So let's just look at a little of the poetics before we dig into some of the meetings, the structure, and I think this allows for some of the emotion to come through. I'm going to need help to see clergy if there are any hands. Look, so here we are in the core of the Kol Nidrei. So we start, I'm going to call it the A's. Kol Nidrei, v'esarei, v'charame, v'koname, v'chinuye, v'kinusei, and then we get a hard v'shavuot. Then we go into the nas, and we get na, 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 and we switch to kippurim. So we go again and again from the repetition of a sound at the end of the word to a switch. Yom Kippurim zeh ad Yom Kippurim haba aleinu l'tova, and then we're going to get into the, if you will, the hones. And again, we have this repetition of sound, and the ings, if you will, shavikin, shavitin, and so on. So the poetics actually, the poetics actually allow us, or allow the music to build in a lovely kind of a way. It has that sort of repetition that has a hypnotic function and an elevated function. Now it comes just after what I find, as a kid, I found this both bizarre and frightening. So look at what's happening in this creation of the court. B'shiva shel mala uv'shiva shel mata. Now this translation, with one voice assembled sages past and present declare, a more classic translation. I'm going to pop over to the conservative Machzor for just a second. A more classic translation: by the authority of the court on high, and by the authority of this court here below, the one we're just creating, with divine consent and consent of the congregation, we grant permission to pray with those who have transgressed. So it's a little more interpretive in Mishkan HaNefesh. Let us pray as one on this night as repentance. Let none be excluded from our community of prayer. But let's make no mistake about it, that this is saying we have permission to pray with avaryanim, with those who have sinned. And as a kid, I would say, ooh, they're here. What's that? Of course, it's all of us, and we'll talk about that in just a minute when we take apart Kol Nidrei on a line-by-line basis. Thoughts, comments, questions before we dig a little deeper into the prayer and, in a sense, begin to redeem it. Okay, so let's look at it in a really detailed way, and this is where I think the beauty of Kol Nidrei comes out, and where those connections that all of you who spoke talked about really comes from. So I'm going to share my screen yet again. So this is a map, and I can't see any of you. So if there, you want to stop me, just jump in or raise your hand, and one of the clergy will jump in as well. So this is the layout of Kol Nidrei. So we start with this line, Or Zarua Latzit Tzadik, Yishrei Lev Simcha. Light is sown for the righteous. So what stands out here is on this night of the beginning of the Day of Atonement, we're echoing back to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is Yom Hadin, the Day of Judgment is Rosh Hashanah. It is the New Year. It's Yom Harat Olam. It's the creation, the birthday, if you will, of the world. So we are beginning with an allusion to creation and to Rosh Hashanah. So we're moving, in a sense, from one to the other with this very simple line. There is a midrash that says that the light that was created by God on the first day, when God says, Vayehior, Vayehior, God said there was light and there was light. That light isn't the light we see today. That light that was created the first day is a light so spiritual. It's not about seeing. It's about the ability to perceive from one end of the world to the other end of time. And it's so powerful that God needed to hide it away for the righteous, because the evil ones, unscrupulous ones, would use it for bad purpose. So we're recalling, they call it the Or HaGanuz, the hidden light, and we're remembering that there is a hidden light that is in fact possibly available for us. This is a line from Rabbi Karen Kedar. Kol Nidrei's preamble teaches us the spiritual principle of aspiration. Now this is all in, we're supposed to get this all in that first sentence. This reference to creation, this reference to Rosh Hashanah, this reference to the possibility of attaining a righteous spiritual light. And that's how we begin. And then we go into the invocation of the court. Now this is really fascinating, because what's happening here is we are in a liminal time. We're in the time between the last day of doing Teshuvah, the 9th of Tishrei, and Yom Kippur, where the sun is setting. We are evoking realms above and realms below. We're evoking sinners and non-sinners. We're evoking time and timelessness, the court above and the court here. So it is, in a sense, meant to be disorienting. It's meant to say we are in a time when change is possible. Liminal times always frighten the rabbis, because so much could happen. Liminal space, liminal time, liminal moments. So we're actually creating it as a liminal moment. We're calling out that we're in this transitionary space. The Talmud says that any fast that does not include the participation of some sinners is not really a fast. So we're also the point here is we're making it clear that this is a legal fast, because it is not just the righteous, but it is those of us who have sinned. The normally separate realms are merging in some way. And Rabbi Noah Kushner puts together this beautiful 3-stage. I'm sorry? Was there a question? Okay. This 3-stage review, if you will, of the process of what's going on. So this stage, invoking the courts, is just like me as a kid when I said, ew, the sinners are here. The stage 1 is, well, I'm not guilty like those people, but I can still pray with them. So in a sense, as she says, without any preparation, Kol Nidrei places us before a heavenly court, and without requiring a single admission of guilt, she says, in a cunning move, Kol Nidrei focuses our attention on the possibility of wrongdoing among us. This is just getting us warmed up. So then we have the annulment. The annulment being presented as a courtly procedure with the Sifrei Torah and the Shaliach Tzibur, the cantor, the leader, making up this court with us there as witnesses. And Rabbi Kushner brings us to the second stage. Oh, I get it now. If my vows in the future need to be annulled, it might be the case that I might be guilty in the future. I can see myself as a potential sinner, which of course opens the door to, oh yeah, I'm part of the human race. I am, in fact, one of the sinners that we're talking about in this particular prayer. So I'm going to stop here. We are at sort of a natural break in, or a natural shift in, if you will, of the energy of Kol Nidrei, and just check in and see if there are any comments, questions, memories, thoughts that you want to interject at this point. Yeah, Michael.
You made a comment earlier about how other people have looked at this and said Jews can't really be trusted, and how that's misinterpreted. But the way it's phrased here, it doesn't necessarily say, oh, this is just between us and God. Any contracts that I signed during the year are still valid. So it's kind of, it seems to be really it's hard to get away from the fact that it's kind of a general renunciation.
Yeah, I appreciate your bringing that up. So the rabbis understood nidrei as a vow to God. It is a specific legal term, and in fact, all of these terms relate to the relationship between God and human. So it is absolutely easily misunderstood as, a one-time free pass against any commitment, or a once-a-year free pass, if you want to think of it that way, against any commitment. And that's certainly not the language of it, or the understanding of the language as the rabbis would understand it. And it's remarkably arcane, obtuse language that can be read in a lot of ways. I once, when I was teaching this Kol Nidrei, at this particular point, Michael, at this moment, a similar but not the same comment was made, like, well, if we just get a free pass here, what's the point anyway? And my two answers are, one, as I answered to you, that Here we're talking about specific kinds of vows, vows to God, which are dangerous. People die often in Torah when vows to God are made. And also it exists in the context of our liturgy. It is not a freestanding prayer. It exists in the context of a process of teshuvah, whether you begin that process on Rosh Hashanah, or whether you begin it on Ashkenazi Slichot, or whether you begin it on the 1st of Elul, which is more a Sephardi custom, but many of us, especially with some of the new resources from CCIR, begin this 40-day period on the 1st of Elul as a preparatory process. Some even would say it begins on Tisha B'Av with this breaking of who we are and the need to heal self. So depending on how you look at it, it's this pinnacle, if you will, this high moment occurs in both a liturgical process and in an action-oriented process. The teshuvah that's looked for up until now is, mending my life, mending, my relationships with myself and with others, and in anticipation of mending my relationship with God. So the two answers are: one, it's a legal formula really just about Nidrei, and it fits in a context. And we can't forget when we look at any of these bits of liturgy that we're looking at only a few bits, and we're looking at them in a broad context. But it was a beautiful question. Thank you. Other questions, comments before we dive back in? So if you recall, I believe it was in our first session when we started talking about Unatana Tokef. I said that we as Jews claim the right to be forgiven. So we're going to look at that right here, right now in Kol Nidrei. We claim the right to be forgiven if, got to do that rabbinic thing, if we do a sincere, honest, heartfelt teshuvah. When I begin formulating Mysteries of the Machzor 2 for next year, we're going to look at what that means. We're going to look at Sefer Jonah, which we read as the Haftarah on Yom Kippur afternoon. What does it really mean to do an honest tshuva, which is, I think, the crux of that particular book. But as long as we're doing that, we claim the right. We claim the right to be forgiven by God, and we're going to sum that up in 3 very short, succinct lines in a row in Kol Nidrei. So before I go back to the text, any other comments, questions from where we're at? Tov, I don't want to leave you with a cliffhanger there, so let's go back to the screen share. Okay, so okay. Now again, at this point I can't see hands or faces or so on. So I'm going to just take us through it from the beginning again, so we have that sort of that energy. We call on the light of creation, connecting ourselves to hope, righteousness, and Rosh Hashanah, connecting us to aspiration. We invoke the courts. We almost get confused, if you will, in this liminal moment, and the visual cues of the sun setting and people wearing talitot in the evening, which is historically not traditional, although it is traditional in the Reform world. There's that visual cue, there's the musical cue that hits us with the annulment, this repetition of sound that has a meditative quality, and the cantor's voice sort of carrying us up. And we hear that amazing music 3 times, and then we have 3 rapid lines. So the first is from Numbers 15:26, and it's the biblical guarantee that God will pardon sins done unwittingly. So what has happened in this particular parasha? I'm going to flip over to the language itself for just a second, if I can get my screen to scroll. Did you see? If you didn't see the screen switch, someone should speak up. So there's the Kol Nidrei, and then we get this line: all shall be forgiven, the entire community of Israel and the stranger who lives in their midst, for all have gone astray in error. This is after the incident of the spies. The spies go out, 10 of the 12 give a negative report. The land is occupied by giants. We're going to be crushed. The spies essentially cause or tap into a lack of faith, and God forgives them. After Moses asks, God forgives them, for they went astray in error. So if this is an unwitting sin, we are going to be forgiven. So we have now entered stage 3 of Rabbi Kushner's 3-part understanding. We go from stage 1, I'm not guilty like those other people, to I'm not guilty now, I might be, oops, I probably am, yeah, this is me, to forgive us. Us as a community, as we heard, us standing together, forgive us. So we're guaranteed forgiveness. This is Dr. Ellen Humansky's 3-part on the far right of the screen. We are guaranteed forgiveness, but we have to ask for it. So we have this prayer. The second line is Moses praying for the forgiveness of the people after the incident of the golden calf. So the rabbis would have expected us to understand that. You'll see that we're now quoting Numbers 14:19. Would have expected us to understand that Numbers 14:18 list God's 13 attributes of divine mercy. So in a sense, we're evoking, by the choice of this verse, we're not only evoking Moses's prayer for the people, but we're evoking God's attributes of mercy as we ask for prayer, ask for forgiveness. Let's look at the text for just a second. This is Moses prayed to God, as you have been faithful to this people ever since Egypt, please forgive their failings now in keeping with your boundless love. So Moses prays for us. And I think this next line is remarkably powerful. Vayomer Adonai, salachti kidvarecha. God responds, I will forgive, or I forgive as you have asked. And in fact, this line is also traditionally sung 3 times. I don't know how your individual congregations do it, but that's the traditional method. So look, there was nothing to fear after all. There was only and there's always divine forgiveness if we ask, and if we go through a sincere process of repentance. I'm going to stop here before I get to the denouement and see if there are additional thoughts or comments. So you notice this huge switch from this liminal, this odd creation of the courts and this Aramaic legal formula to this rapid fire set of lines of forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. Gwen, I think you had a hand, and you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Okay,
Gotcha.
back to your first lecture on Unetane Tokef. And one of my concerns about that was the people, who shall live and who shall die. And we're sitting in the presence of people who know that they're going to die because they have cancer, heart disease, whatever it is.
Right.
And repentance, prayer, and charity will soften the decree. So we go from that really tough one where I asked you to write another prayer for it. Then we wait 10 days later and we get forgiveness and prayer. I don't know, why the distance? Do the two link together? That's basically it.
There are lots of contrasts in the liturgy. This is maybe not the best analogy, but in some ways, this is the speech before the game, the speech before the big game. You can do this. It's not going to be easy. It is, in some respects, a life and death moment. I would say, by my way of thinking, it's a life and death moment of the spirit. I don't know, Gwen, what it is that some people who know they are dying step into that moment in one way, and others step into it in a much different way. And how people with different struggles step into various moments. But what's at stake on Yom Kippur for those of us who have a more modern understanding of air quoting punishment, is that what's at stake is my spiritual life, my relationship with God, and in a sense my relationship with self, and perhaps how I die. And that doesn't sugarcoat anything, because they are very tough moments for people who are struggling. Thank you for bringing that back in, Gwen.
And why the 10 days?
Why is it 10 days? You mean as opposed to 7 or 6 or 5?
Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and this prayer. Any ideas?
Well, I mean, it's the date of the holiday is Torah bound. So 10 days you will have this sacred assembly. Michael, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I really love the way you analyze the structure, because looking at it, maybe this is a bit flippant, but you can sort of say, okay, we convene the court, we ask that our vows be nullified, we acknowledge that we're sinners, we ask for forgiveness, and we get forgiveness. And you kind of have the feeling, well, okay, that's it, I can go home now. We're done but I guess it's just sort of a preamble, as you said, to the process that we're going to go through the next day.
Yeah, and that process begins that evening. I mean, we start saying the Vidui that evening. I mean, we're not off the hook yet. You know, we're going to say Vidui, we're going to say Unatana Tokef, we're going to say Avinu Malkeinu. You know, we're going to run through all the hard stuff. And if it was simple, I would have done it already, right? If being a better man, speaking for myself, being a better person, a better human, a better member of society, if being a better human was that easy, I would not need this process. And I would not need it again and again and again. But I do. I haven't met anybody yet who doesn't. Maybe there are a few Lamed Vavniks out there that don't need it, but they wouldn't say that either. Thank you, Gwen and Michael. Other comments, questions, thoughts before we get to the last line and my one sadness about Mishkan HaNefesh. Okay, so let's go back to the share screen. So classically, the Kol Nidrei ends with Shechianu. So why not rejoice? It's a moment in which God's grace is visible, tangible. It might not have come yet. I mean, we got a whole day of work to do, and I'm still working when those gates are shut in Ne'ilah. But knowing that the work will yield understanding from a compassionate God, why not rejoice? Why not say Shechianu? And so this traditionally ends the Kol Nidrei. It's not found in Mishkan HaNefesh here. There's a comment in a book about Mishkan HaNefesh called Divrei Mishkan HaNefesh, which says essentially, in order to avoid a certain confusion in the repetition of Shechianu, so close together, they favored using the Shechianu after the candle lighting over saying it here, and only chose to say it one time at the opening of Yom Kippur. Now I understand that there is a principle in Reform Judaism, in Reform liturgy, of conciseness, meaning we're not going to say the same prayer over and over and over again, which is kind of a challenge for the high holidays in particular. But you'll notice that in Mishkan HaNefesh with Avinu Malkeinu, for example, they mix up the verses from place to place. So at any rate, I would love to see Shechianu in this point, just because I think it is the exclamation point on the prayer. I don't suppose most people would miss it here. I suppose that each of your multiple congregations do it differently. And that's just the beauty of the Minhag HaMakom, the custom of the place. So that's a line by line of Kol Nidrei. Before I do some summing up, I'd like to see if there are any other questions, comments, thoughts. Tov. So this is a quote from Rabbi Janet Martyr. She says, Kol Nidrei is not an absolution, but a vote of no confidence. It presupposes that we cannot be trusted. We make vows and fail to fulfill them. We make the wrong vows. We're inconsistent, faithless, hapless. It is prefaced by a declaration that we are permitted to pray with sinners, who else is there to pray with? Because unlike the Bob Dylan song, "It Ain't Me, Babe," it is me. One of the commentaries from that book I just quoted, Divrei Mishkan Nefesh, says, the point of Yom Kippur is not to convince a judgmental deity to pardon us, so much as it is our acceptance of a loving and compassionate God already offering forgiveness. The work of the day then is not asking for forgiveness, but planning out our course of repentance and renewal. Now, Rabbi Sachs would say repentance and renewal is predicated on confession. Or for anybody who's familiar with 12-step programs, you got to make amends before you move on to fixing one's life. That process, and before you do the amends, you have to do a searching and fearless moral inventory of yourself, and that's what's happening in throughout the day. So I see we're running out of time. I'm going to check in one more time. Questions, comments, thoughts, objections. David.
I have a question about when you kicked this off, you talked about how Kol Nidrei is not really a prayer, but legal proceedings, and is it the convention of the court that you would object to? What do you replace it with? Do you go back to what the Reform movement did back in Germany and totally scrub it? Do you do music? What's your recommendation?
I think we keep it personally. I think so. What we've been doing over the 4 weeks, I hope, is bringing you all ideas of how to relate to the liturgy in a way that sadly we don't teach that often, on a much more nuanced. I would say sometimes we get taught and bring into our lives a more pediatric view of prayer. So what I was really trying to do is just up your understanding that this doesn't function as a prayer in terms of the way liturgy functions, but it has taken on that in our hearts and our souls, and we think of it as a prayer, which is a beautiful thing. And in fact, it when it switches from the legal function of the Kol Nidrei to the biblical quote, it does begin to evoke prayer. It's Moses's prayer, and God, two of Moses's, one of Moses's prayer and two of God's responses. So it does begin to evoke prayer. Remember, we think of the first night of Yom Kippur as Kol Nidrei, but it's Kol Nidrei and then Ma'ariv, the evening prayer. So there's just so much going on. I personally, I love the question, David. It is a legal proceeding. I think it is the right moment for a legal proceeding. And creating that whole liminal moment, that sort of disorientation leading toward an orientation, if you will, to a forgiving God, is perfect.
Thank you.
B'simcha, with joy. So I see I'm out of time. I love to close by reading a piece. I do want to be respectful here, but with your permission, I'll read a piece. It's called "The Season of Return." It's from This Grateful Heart. They used to name rabbis by the name of their book, and if any of my books become my name, I want to be known as the Grateful Heart. This is called the season of return. This is the season of return, of returning to ourselves and our people, of returning to our God and returning to our calling. This is the season of quiet, of quieting the mind to hear the voice, of quieting the heart to hear the soul, of quieting the self to make space for the Ein Sof. This is the season of surrendering odd quirks and old habits to dignity and kindness, of surrendering fear and despair to hope and adventure, to honor and service. This is the season of returning to wholeness and love, to prayer and charity, to family and friends, the season that reminds us of who we are and who we might become, the season that summons us to return ourselves to purpose and our lives to God's holy word. Amen. Chag Sameach, Shana Tova, Gmar Chatima Tova. It's been a joy and a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alden. On behalf of the Reformed Rabbis of Greater Toronto and members of RJCC congregations, we want to thank you so much for these teachings. Thank you all for participating, and I think we really all got a boost for the holiday to come and a deeper meaning of our liturgy. So we thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cantor Littman, for singing this morning as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Really a
Thanks, everyone.
pleasure.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Thank you so much. This was excellent.
Mar Chatima Tova, everyone.
Mar Chatima Tova.
Marta.